There are people downstairs, and I don't know who they are. I don't remember why they're shouting my name. I don't remember a lot of things anymore. Please, don't forget me. Remember. I made my fortune selling some middleware I had been working on in my spare time to a growing tech company. This was back in 2002? Or was it 2003? A long time ago. I was barely in my 30s and rich beyond my wildest imagination. But you quickly realize money brings little joy when you've got no one to share it with. I had someone back then. I still remember her face. I do. I promise. She had eyes that would weep at Christmas adverts. She had hair that would turn brown at the roots when she hadn't been to the hairdresser's. She had a crooked smile that would reveal itself when she danced. She was mine. Then, she wasn't. She was killed the day after we celebrated 1-point-something million pounds arriving in our bank account. October 19th. I remember. We were rich. We were happy. Then we weren't. A snowstorm. Black ice. Car found at bottom of cliff. Her green eyes. Her dyed hair. Her crooked smile. All wiped from the earth. I remember trying to identify her body. It was near impossible. I don't remember much else. Since then, I've been trapped in this crumbling village in the middle of the Yorkshire moors. My wife and I had stumbled across it on our way to a seaside holiday. We fell in love with the rugged ruralness and bought a cottage on the outskirts. It was to be a private getaway where we'd grow old together. Now, I'm just old and alone. The last 18 years have found me drinking away my fortune. There's one pub in the village, the Steel and Oak, built in 1797. You'd be forgiven for thinking that the decor hadn't been updated since then. A cold and barren place where only the desperate would drink. I'd spend my nights with 1 or 2 alcoholics. Farmers, mostly, I think. We had nothing in common, so we kept ourselves to ourselves. Occasionally, a lost tourist would stumble into the decrepit pub. They were always on their way to somewhere nicer, most of the time, but had gotten lost or their car had broken down. I helped a few of them, I think. I remember giving lifts, as long as they didn't mind a bit of buzz driving. None of them stayed very long. Why would anyone want to spend their days with a sad drunk? As my wife would say, I think. This afternoon, a blizzard came in from the coast. The forecast said snow was going to hit the valley for at least the next 3 days. Around 3 o'clock, a young couple came blustering in from the snow. You could tell they were tourists, dressed in bright neon winter outfits that stung against the dark pub. I was going to take a few bottles home and drink myself through the storm, but the fella insisted on buying me another round. There was a desperation in his voice that made me suspect I was in the presence of a fellow alcoholic. Don't get many free drinks in this village, so gotta take them where you can. He was called John, a tall man, slim in some places, fat in others. His receding hair was partially hidden under a green bandana. She was called Jane, a pretty young thing, dressed in a yellow puffer jacket with dark hair and blonde highlights. And so the drinking began. John and Jane were happy and beautiful and polite. It made me sick. I wanted to hate them. Their joyousness made no sense in my world. But I was having an unfortunately good time. She asked if I remembered her. Something had been floating amongst the burnt remains of my brain. A flickering image. Maybe a smell. I couldn't grasp it, though. My memory has turned to dust. I've been known to forget my own name at times. Her smile faded. She said her last name was Hardwick. Family friends, I think. Must have been one of the wife's many acquaintances. She was always entertaining people, hosting weekends so friends can enjoy what she liked to call the real outdoors. Jane must have been young when my wife was obliterated at the bottom of that cliff. Jane asked if I ever redecorated the hallway. It was a phrase that stung. My wife despised the garish pink and blue flowered wallpaper and constantly demanded it get stripped away. The problem was, the room had towering high ceilings, meaning the walls stood like giant monoliths. It would have taken at least a week to strip it all, and at the time, I thought I had better things to do. John let out a sharp, harsh laugh. I changed the subject. After a few more drinks, I excused myself to go to the toilet. The urinal had been mysteriously smashed the week before, so I locked myself away in the cubicle and treated myself to a sit-down piss. Just as I was about to start, the bathroom opened, and I heard someone squeak in across the tile floor. They stopped outside the cubicle. A pair of expensive walking boots looked up at me from the gap underneath the stall. The shoes had barely got a lick of dirt on them. "That you, John?" I slurred. It was John. He didn't realize the urinal was broken. I sat in silence for 20 seconds as I tried to piss. No chance. So I surrendered the cubicle. John had been waiting so close to the door, his nose must have almost touched it. He said it was a shame that I didn't remember his wife. I agreed. It was. I had forgotten a lot of lovely things in my life, and she seemed like a lovely young lady. I told him. She was, he said. He stared at me for a moment, before sliding into the cubicle. Back at the table, Jane was staring out the window. The snow was picking up something fierce. It was being thrown around the landscape by an angry gale. Strange tunes whistled through the holes in the window frame. There was a newfound sadness on Jane's face. She asked again if I remembered her. I lied and said that I did. It was unconvincing. Her face drooped further. The blizzard pounded against the window. A pang of guilt spurred me to offer them a lift. They were staying at Oldman Farm. just a bit further out from my house. Jane gave me a wonky smile, but I could tell it wasn't real. She put her hands over mine. They felt soft and warm. Her eyes were like emeralds, dazzling in the firelight. She told me that she was sorry. "What for?" I asked, but John appeared at the table and downed the last of his pint. He said it was time to leave. The blizzard was raging when we clambered into my rusty Land Rover and left the village. I could barely see beyond the car bonnet as the white flakes whipped around us. Everything had turned into mounds of snow of varying sizes. Hills, trees, houses. Even the road signs had vanished into the whiteness, meaning I had to make my way back from memory. I made several wrong turns and had to spin the car around on the gathering ice. Julie and Jim were barely paying attention. Harsh whispers forced small clouds of fog from their mouths. The word pathetic was muttered a few times. Eventually, Jane folded her arms and stared down at her feet. The windscreen wipers were the only sound for the rest of the journey, as I watched Jeremy scowl at me through the rearview mirror. By the time we got to mine, the blizzard was screaming and pulling at the car. The rest of the journey would be downhill and treacherous even in the best of weather. There was no way Julian and Janet were getting back. I offered for them to wait it out back at mine. I had a few frozen chicken tikka masala meals and more than enough booze to tie us over. John looked ready to deny the offer, but Jane cut him off. She would love to stay, apparently. John glared out the window and told her not to waste her time through his gritted teeth. The passenger door opened and Jane silently got out. "Women, eh?" I said. John leaned his head against the glass and told me that he hated me. He would never forgive me for what I had done to Judith. "What did I do?" I asked. He told me that I don't remember. My head started to hurt. It was piercing, like a hot needle through the eye. My mouth tasted like sulfur. The rush of blood squeezed through my ears. I told him that I was sorry. He just grunted and got out of the car. I took a bottle of golden ale out from the plastic bag beneath my feet and popped it open with a twist of my car keys. 3 deep, burning gulps. And it was done. I felt better. I couldn't see John and Jane at the front door. I called out their names into the freezing void. Every shout was taken by the breeze. After a few desperate attempts of calling them, I gave up and decided to warm up inside. Maybe they would be easier to spot from the windows of the upper floor. I slid my key into the lock, but the door was already open. I've never been too fussed about home security, but I could have sworn I locked it today. Jamie and Jill were already inside, their voices barking away from the kitchen. Their argument had turned fierce. Wails bounced off the pink and blue hallway walls. Jennifer cried out that Jordan was a self-obsessed monster. Justin accused Jade of being a dirty little flirt. A plate smashed on the floor. I asked if everything was okay. Jim told me to screw off, and that I was a fat waste of space. Jill screamed at him to stop talking to me like that. I held my breath and crept upstairs. I snuck into the bathroom as the shouting continued. I clicked the lock closed and sat down on the side of the bath. John accused Jane of wanting to leave him. He was slurring. Jane asked, "Why would anyone want to spend their days with a sad drunk?" And I began to cry. I wish I could say I remembered my own name, but my mind is ash. A burnt inferno of crushed steel at the bottom of some cliff. My name is John Hardwick. My wife, Jane, was killed when her car skidded off the road and rolled down a 150-foot cliff. I was supposed to take the car to the garage and replace the worn brake pads. I went to the pub instead. I forgot to tell her. I forgot. They've stopped arguing now, but I can still hear them moving around the house. I think they're looking for me. Stop crying, Jane. I remember now. I remember. If you go into this one tiny, dingy one-story bar in Paris, and the right bartender is behind the counter that night, you might be able to see a very exclusive gallery show of the lost works of one Henri Beauchamp. However, to get in, you have to prove you're a devotee of the artist. You'll be asked, in clear and perfect English,
"What would you like to partake of this glorious night?"
Answer, absinthe. No matter what. Any other drink, from whiskey to water, will kill you as you sleep. The next question will regard the type, and you must answer one of two things. The stuff that the man himself could not bear to take, or the good stuff, the best stuff. If you ask for any other absinthe, in any other way, you will be plagued by nightmares for 13 days. Each night's dream will be more horrible than the last, until, upon the 13th dream, your nightmare will follow you every moment of your waking and sleeping life. Don't try and cheat the barkeep. The door locked behind you. You have to drink what he gives you, doom or not. That such a powerful man granted you audience should be enough. Besides, I've heard that the dying complimented his drinks in their death throes. If you make it that far before sealing your fate, the bartender will say,
"Be sure you handle this with care. This is the finest I have."
From here, you may do one of two things. Say, word for word, "I overestimated my fortitude, and I bid you good eve." If the barkeep nods, you may leave the door you entered, unharmed and with nothing gained and nothing lost, except the time spent inside. Or you can go on. You will be given a glass with a 7-sided rim, with each side twisting ever so delicately around the basin until forming a sleek and simple handle. You will also receive a very, very special absinthe spoon in the shape of a key. The holes at the key's top serve as the draining point for the alcohol to pour over the sugar cube. And, of course, an unmarked bottle, stripped long ago of its label, scraps of paper sticking to its sides, covered in the rot of the decades past. The spoon is completely flat, but has two distinct sides. One with a groove along the shaft of the key, and one without. Turn the shaft down, so its groove will be face down. If you attempt this face up, your absinthe will taste foul, your nose will burn, and your eyes will shrivel in their sockets with unspeakable horrors not of this world. Now, if your spoon is the right way up, begin preparing the absinthe as one would. Put the sugar on the spoon and pour the alcohol over so it gains its color and special qualities. Say cheers to your friend, the barkeep, and bottoms up. If you don't, the absinthe will burn every innard it touches with the power and pain of sulfuric acid. If you've done it right, the already dim lights will go off, and darkness will consume the bar. Don't be afraid. The darkness is the cue that you've been approved for the exhibit. Wait out the darkness, and keep silent as the dead, lest the bartender decide to make you so. Eventually, not too long, 2 to 3 minutes, a green floodlight will shine brightly on a door on the far wall of the bar. The bar will be bathed in green, and not just from the floodlight. Little luminescent spheres will gently drift through the room, and the barkeep will no longer be there, nor any other unassuming patron inside before. There's no danger at this time. Consider it a safe point. If you didn't finish the absinthe, you don't have to, but you might need the alcohol. Either way, take the spoon and put it in the keyhole of the green-lit portal's doorknob. It will fit perfectly, and reach the end of the keyhole with a resounding click. Inside is a small elevator, with the most beautiful woman any mortal eyes can imagine, bathed in a green glow in just such an angle that the light refracts beyond her into the shape of wings. The green fairy herself will ask you, "Going up?" And considering all the trouble you went through, it would only make sense to say yes. Now, you have one more hurdle to clear. She will ask you, as you cross the line from the bar to the compartment, how would you compare Beauchamp's surrealism to that of, say, René Magritte? For your reply, you must say, "I've come to see more than art tonight." If you don't, the green floodlight will blow out, the doors will slam shut, and the elevator will plummet through a seemingly infinite blackness before a real light grows brighter as the elevator nears the very depths of hell. Now, if your elevator begins to go up, the green light will also fade, but in its place will be the cool glow of the moon. But before you even recognize it, the elevator will reach the top of its, well, let's call it a shaft to not get too intricate. Now, I'm not as sure about this as the rest, but I've heard that if the green fairy kisses you on the cheek as she leaves the elevator, you will be blessed with a creative inspiration, a permanent, ever-changing muse. You can't ask her, you can't kiss her. She has to do it out of her own volition. If not, well, nothing. But no reason to do it anyway, and anger the woman who is responsible for keeping Beauchamp's paintings safe for so many years. You will enter, from the elevator, a turn-of-the-century parlor, with a large poster of Henri Beauchamp on the left side of the opposite wall. On the right is a door. Taking the time to read the poster is a fairly good idea, as it explains the very significance of Mr. Beauchamp. You see, he was a struggling surrealist in the 1920s, always making art to try to be free of all premeditation, and managed to do so. You see, after one night in a tiny, dingy, one-story bar in Paris, he began to paint patterns. First, it was geometric patterns, then complete fractals, then images that would be in the newspaper the next day, then next week, then, from 50 years ago, 100 in the future, 200 in the past. Then, on his last night of life, he kidnapped 3 young girls from their homes at night, murdered them, and painted his finest masterpieces in reds and yellows with the blood and bile of virgins. He took his own life immediately after painting exactly 13 of these. They are what lies behind the door. The first 6, from left to right, show the genesis of the universe, the only true visage of God as viewable to the eyes of man, the true image of Jesus Christ, the sprawling clouds of heaven, every pope, from the first to faces not yet recognizable, and a portrait of Jesus' appearance in his second coming. The other 6, from right to left, show the cataclysm of the universe, the only true visage of Satan as viewable to the eyes of man, the true image of Judas, the sprawling flames of hell, every human-embodied demon, from the first to faces not yet recognizable, and a portrait of the Antichrist in his second coming. Now, 6 and 6 makes 12. But what of the 13th? This 13th painting is turned around on its wall pin. The image facing the wall. The space around it is roped up at a very wide diameter, and under the flipped image is a sign in 3 languages. The top is in the scriptures of the seraphim, the bottom in the runes of the highest demonic orders, and in the middle, in Roman letters, do not touch. Now, like the kiss, I can't say this part with as much certainty, but all the same, I heard that somehow, as he died, Beauchamp flayed his skin, his organs, his very soul, into some sort of collage. How he took his dead body and created such a horrific masterpiece, I could never say, nor would I ever dare to. So, if you make it, maybe you can flip the canvas over and tell me sometime. You can tell me about it over a drink. My whole life, I had the curse of obedience. I never told anyone. I didn't even realize it wasn't normal, until I noticed other people could freely defy people's wishes. But everything I was told to do, I did. I always had a clean room. I always stopped chatting in class. And I always was the person people would come to when they needed help cheering up. When I'm doing these actions, I'm not me. I don't know if someone else takes over. I don't know if my body simply exists to carry out actions without a consciousness. Maybe I remain in control, but forget it after. But somehow, every time I carried out a task that had been asked of me, I'd simply black out until it was done. I'd have no memory of fulfilling the task. Ask me to pick up something at the shop, and I could not tell you how much it cost. But I'd retain the skills. Ask me to learn how to use certain software, and I'd understand it like the back of my hand when it's done. When I got to college and moved in with a couple of other students, things got a bit more difficult. Teachers aren't as personal, so nobody ever told me to get on with my work. My flatmates don't care how messy my room is, so they wouldn't tell me to clean there, just to clean the shared areas. I got lazy. I wasn't doing much because nobody told me to. I was finishing college when I realized a couple of extra things about this curse. Something that I thought I could use to turn it into a gift. The first is that it had to be to my face, in person. Ask me to do something over the phone or via text, and I could do as I please. The second, though, was more interesting to me. If I asked myself to do something whilst looking into a mirror, I could do these tasks on autopilot. A door had opened in life, and I walked through without hesitation, not realizing that it would lock behind me. I'd use this newfound loophole to do things that were boring. Make dinner. Wash your clothes. Complete this essay. Life was as easy as when I was a kid. I didn't need my parents or teachers to tell me the right things to do. I could tell myself. I was back to having a life where I do everything myself, whilst also having everything done for me. I experimented a little with cameras in my flat. I asked myself to clean the shared living area and watch the recording after. To my surprise, I didn't act all robotic. I seemed like myself. In fact, halfway through emptying the bin, one of my flatmates got back and spoke to me. We shared an inside joke, laughed, and spoke about our day. All the time, my voice had its normal inflections and normal tones. It was like I was watching my twin. I realized that I had been using this all wrong. There is so much potential I have with this. Could I stop wars? Could I bring world peace? Could I become everything I've ever desired? I started with something I had wanted for the past few years, but never had the courage or opportunity. You need to get into a relationship. Suddenly, I was laying next to the most beautiful person I had ever seen. We were cuddled up in a bedroom I didn't recognize, and they were asleep. The bedroom must have been mine, or maybe ours, as items I owned back at the flat were in this room. I was happy. I was warm. I was cozy. But I wanted to take it a step further. There was a mirror next to the bed. I faced it and said, "You need to start a family." The next thing I remember is holding my baby boy. I was in the hospital with my partner. I did a double take when I looked at her this time, as they didn't look the same. Maybe things hadn't worked out with my previous partner. I looked in the hospital mirror, took a deep breath, and said, "You need to become rich." Sure enough, there I am, in my office, a plaque on my desk with my name on it, and CEO. I don't know what company I founded, but from the looks of things, I'm doing quite nicely for myself. I went into my office's private bathroom, and before I even caught a proper glimpse of myself, I said, "I want to be the most famous and loved person on the planet." I was on stage, accepting an award for Outstanding Actor in a Drama Series, with applause thundering in the background. Ah, shit. No mirrors. I was gonna have to bullshit my way through this speech. "Thank you." The applause settles down. "When I first founded my company, I never thought I'd one day get into acting. It's been so long that I hardly even remember how I got into it. Or maybe it hasn't been that long. Maybe it just felt like it. I'd like to thank my son. Where is he?" There was silence. An awkward, thick tension in the air. The host of the awards evening spoke up. "I think we all join you in thinking that, even in death, raising Philip still led you to where you are today. And for that, I think somewhere he knows you're thanking him." Oh my God. I thought to myself. I stood there, not knowing what to think. He was only in my arms a few moments ago. I spoke up. "He was too young to be taken from us. The host patted me on the back.
23 is far too young for anyone.
My heart sank. My son died older than me. Wait, how old even am I? Is it selfish of me to care more about myself than the person I raised for 23 years? I mean, I didn't even really raise him. I had used this sick and twisted curse to do it for me. But, I mean, it wasn't my intention. I just wanted to have fame and money. How could I have known it'd take 23 years? The host spoke up again as I walked off stage.
Almost 6 years gone, yet still always in our hearts.
Oh my God. It took 29 years. I've wasted my life. I'm the most famous, loved, richest person on the planet. And I don't have a goddamn clue who I am. At this point, was I even the main inhabitor of this body? By existing right now, am I robbing from whatever is in control of me when I'm blacked out? This is more their life than it is mine at this point. Besides, what about my family? I have a family now, apparently. Is it fair that I carry on, not even knowing my wife's name? I can't exactly ask her now, can I? I don't know a thing about anybody in my life. It'd catch up with me eventually. So, I went to the bathroom. Still holding my award, I look directly in the mirror and said 5 words. Live your best possible life. And then everything went black. It is the weirdest thing. And I mean, it's gotten to the point it affects his everyday functioning. It stopped being quirky and become, like, a debilitating mental health issue. You know? It all started a couple of weeks ago. My friend Tim lets it drop in conversation one day that he thinks he's got a stalker. And of course, I'm like, what? Stalker? And he's like, yeah, there's this figure I keep seeing. Kinda far away, and like out of the corner of my eye usually. Followed me here. He's deaf, by the way, so he's signing this to me. That's why I pronounced it as figure. In sign language, you don't really have pronouns. He uses the sign that means someone or something, and uses 2 fingers to indicate the someone's eyes staring, and staring at him from a distance. We're in a coffee shop. I ask him to point out the figure. So he goes outside and looks around, and points to the intersection a block down. It being the city during the morning rush, there are people walking around all over. And I'm like, the lady in the red hat? The dude in the Packers jacket? He keeps shaking his head no. But he's got his eyes on something or someone. He tells me forget it, and we go back inside. And he doesn't mention it again. And when I ask at the end of our meetup if I should be concerned, he waves me off and says, all casual, nah, it's good. Like he's embarrassed he brought it up. But then, a few days later, he FaceTimes me, asking to meet up again, like right now. Can I meet him for dinner? And I've already got plans, but he looks so strung out, so I say sure. We meet at a small diner. He's barely sat down at the table across from me when he says, signing very low so no one can see, even though the chances of the babbling people around us knowing sign language are pretty darn low. Look. See the woman outside the window. I look, searching the street outside. There's only the ordinary pedestrian traffic of the late afternoon. I look back at Tim and shrug. His eyes dart to the window, and he describes the woman he sees. Brunette, 30s or 40s, gray sweatshirt and pants. Okay. I look again. Well, there's a woman. Curly brown hair with her kid. No. He shakes his head, sighs and runs his fingers through his hair, then turns and stares. Keeps staring. I lean over to follow his gaze to the window. There's no one there. Hey, I sign. Are you sure you're feeling okay? I've been seeing her every day for 2 weeks. He interrupts, signing quickly now. She started far away, but each day she's gotten closer. He moves his hands closer and closer together, and adds, I'm worried. What happens when... His hands touch. Who is she? Have you tried, approaching her? Is she like someone you know? All I can think is it must be a relative. Like, maybe he's hallucinating someone important to him. Tim has a history of depression. Has struggled with some form of mental illness throughout most of his life. And spent most of his youth navigating stuff alone, or holding it in. Because his family is hearing, and never bothered to learn sign language. It strikes me to wonder if the woman has ever signed to him. But when I ask if she's hearing or deaf, he shakes his head. I don't know. And tells me he's never met her. Well, not really. But he knows who she is. I snort. It seems like he's being purposely obscure. He claims he knows her, but he's never met her. I ask him again who she is. He gets more agitated, rubbing his arms and looking over his shoulder. Oh, he says. She's moved. Where? I ask. Door. There is no one at the door. Clearly no one. But he keeps giving sneaking glances, looks at me and smiles, and gives me that two-fingered motion again, of eyes, staring and staring, watching him. I ask him if he wants to leave. He says no. She'll just show up wherever he goes. I push my chair out and go to the door. He's watching me with a strange mixture of horror and fascination. I push open the door and step outside, and come back in and sit back down with him. I reiterate to him there's no one there. He rubs his palms into his eyes and finally says, Okay. I ask him again how he knows her. This past summer, Tim tells me, he and his friends went camping. Old friends he hadn't seen since Gallaudet. One of them knew of a hiking trail with some scenic views, remote enough to be less traveled than the more famous peaks. There's a cabin along the trail, rustic but well built. A log cabin like a picture on a postcard. The outhouse has a little window in the door and similar log construction. Everyone goes into the cabin, but Tim comes back out to use the outhouse. The stench is bad, even from a distance. Tim holds his breath, wondering if he shouldn't just go into the woods instead. But he braves the reek and opens the door, and a cloud of flies bursts out, swirling around him in a storm of black wings. And at that moment, the stench hits him like a wave, making his eyes water and his stomach buck as he stumbles away from the outhouse and hurls. When he looks inside, there's a woman sitting on the toilet bench. She's kind of curled in the corner. Gray sweatshirt, gray sweatpants, brown hair draping down around her. What little he can see of her face, her skin, is bloated and splotchy. He only gets a glimpse, and then he rushes to the cabin screaming, bursts in, hands flying. Call the police. Police now. Woman dead, bathroom, call police now, now, now. And his friends look up from poring over a backpack they found, with wallet and phone, an uneaten moldy lunch. And it all so clearly belongs to the corpse in the outhouse. And it's definitely the same woman? I ask him. He nods. The police came and took away her body, he says. They found no evidence of foul play, and he and his friends were allowed to leave after questioning. He shows me her obituary. She was apparently cremated, and her funeral was a few weeks ago. But it is definitely her, he says. Okay. I think for a minute. Well, you had a really traumatic incident. I mean, that had to be traumatic. Finding a dead body. So, like, maybe what you're seeing is because of, like, flashbacks from the trauma. You haven't asked me how she died. Oh, how did she die? He tells me she died of dehydration, when after a few days, the heat and lack of water killed her. But she could have come out at any time. There was nothing stopping her. No lock on the door, no marks or signs of violence. No animal tracks outside. Nothing. Why would she choose to stay and die? Why? He's obviously been torturing himself over this question. Strange. I agree. But I'm much more concerned for Tim's mental health than I am for this woman who decided to end her life in the woods. Tim's obsession with her, his trauma from finding her after her death, has done a number on his already delicate mental state. Do you think your obsession with figuring out why she died might be fueling these visions? I ask him. I mean, regardless if you're seeing her because of trauma or because of some hallucination, it's not like you can change what happened. See if you can get some meds to kill the hallucination. He chuckles humorlessly. Kill a hallucination who's already dead. But he agrees to see a psychiatrist. He seems to be feeling a little restored when we get up to leave. At the door, though, he pauses, his face twisting in anxiety. He waits, letting me go first to open it, and motions me to hold it wide open for him. Only then does he step through. 3 days later, I get another message from Tim. He's stuck and begs me to come to his place. When I arrive, his door is ajar, but it feels rude to walk in, so I press the doorbell and watch the lights flash. My phone buzzes. Come on in. Tim greets me the moment I step inside, like he was right there waiting. He's got his bag in hand, tells me he's late. He's gonna be in so much trouble at work. Would I please come with him downstairs? He'll explain later. He ushers me down the staircase and at the front door of the building draws up sharp, so that I almost bang into him. And he motions me to get the door, even though it's partly open and he could easily push it. I fling it wide, and he dashes out signing, "Thank you. Sorry. I'll explain after work." That evening, he asks me to let him back into his building, and after I let him in, the door is not even locked. The building front door is ajar. He leads me up to his unit and inspects the door. It's closed. His posture visibly relaxes as he unlocks it and invites me in for a beer. Then he admits to me, sheepishly, that he's had a rough few days. Actually called in sick a couple times, because now she is always at the door. Who? I ask, and then at his withering look. Oh, but we just came through the door. Yeah, open doors are fine. Closed doors are fine. But she... Didn't you notice the building door was ajar? He shows the partial open door with his hands, a slight gap between them, and then grips one hand that represents the door with the other. Her fingers were holding it open. I don't know what to say to this. It seems a whole new level of delusion. Tim hands me a beer from the fridge, explaining that she is always at the door now, but he only sees her fingers, and sometimes her eyes. So what happens if you open the door? I wonder. He just takes a swig of his beer, morosely, and then his gaze goes distant. He's focused on something behind me. I turn around. The bedroom door is ajar. I swing back to look at him. Is she there? The bedroom. You see fingers? His eyes meet mine. His face is flat. Deaf people are usually very expressive. Half the grammar is on the face, not the hands. But lately, he's been almost a robot. At that point, finally, he makes the gesture. 2 fingers, pointing at himself, staring and staring. Then he signs FML. I stand, go to the ajar door. Tim pales, eyes rounding, but says nothing. Just takes another sip of his beer and watches me. I push the door, reach up, run my hand down the length of the ajar edge, push it open further, swing it back and forth, look at him, and raise my eyebrows like, See? It's nothing. Nothing's there. He grunts, and his eyelids flutter. I don't think he's been sleeping enough. Hey, do you need someone to stay with you? Nah. He waves me off. Go home. So I do. But here's why I'm writing the post. He hasn't gotten better. He keeps asking me to help him when he gets stuck. Once it was at his workplace. Other times at his apartment. Last time I was there, I noticed he took off all the doors except the front door to his unit. It's gotten to be utterly debilitating to his life. And the last time I saw him, he kept ranting at me about her. About how it didn't save her. And I didn't understand what he meant. Obviously, no one saved her. She was dead when he found her. No, he burst at me. You don't understand. Everything she suffered through, and it didn't save her. I can tell he's falling into depression. I'm worried he's gonna quit his job and just stop leaving his apartment and never come out. How do I help my friend? Update. I never actually posted what I wrote above because it felt like maybe I shouldn't bear Tim's troubles to the world. Like, it's not my story. But I'm sharing it now because he called me this afternoon. Furious. He followed my advice. And the psychiatrist told him to put the doors back on. And if he saw the fingers again, to close his eyes and open the door. That it's a compulsion he needs to gain power over. So he followed the instructions, put up all the doors back in his place, and now he told me he's screwed. He got stuck in his closet. Look, I'll head over, and then we'll open the door together, all right? I'll hold your hand while you push. I might have said this a bit too sarcastically, but then, while I was heading over, I remembered his last rant to me about her. About how everything she suffered didn't save her. Of course, at the time I thought, duh, you found her rotting. Obviously she wasn't saved. But while I was bussing to his place is when it finally struck me what he really meant. See, the fact he found her body in the corner meant she never opened the door. She chose to die rather than going near that door. But it still got her. And maybe that means there's no way for Tim to escape either. And as this revelation hits, a sudden, icy panic grips me. Because I'm the one who told him to go see the doctor. And it was all in his head. And to just buck up and open the door. My heart hammers, 1,000 beats a minute like a hummingbird. As I try to vid call him, it rings and rings. And finally, the agonizing bus ride ends, and I'm leaping off the bus and rushing into his building, and taking the steps 2 at a time. I let myself into his place out of breath, fling open the closet door. Nothing but clothes on hangers, shoeboxes, plastic storage bins and blankets. I stomp my foot, hard, on the wooden planks of the hardwood floor to alert him to my arrival. Nothing. Retreat back out to the bedroom, bathroom, living room. Stomp again, So hard and loud the downstairs neighbors are sure to call and complain. No response. Call his phone. Call and call. Finally, see its light flashing from the closet floor behind the door. And as I lean down to pick it up, when I straighten, I notice that the door, it has swung closed behind me and is now just barely ajar. And there, wrapped around the edges of the closet door, are Tim's fingers. At first, I think it's a prank. Ha ha, I sign sarcastically, even though he can't see me, and I reach for the door and stop. I'm not sure why I stop. Some instinct. I wait for him to open it. And it's been over an hour. I'm still waiting. I think I'm going to need some help getting out. But then, once I do, what do I do next? How do I make sure that Oh God. Tim just... His hand, it's still curled around the door, and his index finger just uncurled and curled again, beckoning me closer. Please, help me. What should I do? Rule 1. Never look at the gardener. Rule 2. Enter doors only after knocking. Rule 3. The clocks need daily winding. Rule 4. House staff and visitors must mask. Rule 5. Every statue in the long hall must be completely covered. Rule 6. Rule 3 repeats for the grandfather clock. Set again before leaving. Rule 7. Wrong deliveries occur daily, only except on the second attempt, not the first or third. Run the package to the center of the hedge maze. Leave the maze within 5 minutes. Rule 8. Depart Kilgore Court for any video calls. Video and photography are strictly prohibited. I reviewed the list of rules from the advert one more time as I stepped off the bus. Crumbling stone walls bordered austere Victorian houses lining the narrow street. At the top of the hill, the current caretaker for Kilgore Court, Pim Perrin, met me beside a towering wrought iron gate. Small and straight-backed in a gray suit, he would have cut a dapper figure were it not for the ostentatious beaked and feathered mask that covered his face. "Good morning, Sam Miller," said Pim, extending a wrinkled hand. "Your references claim you excel at following instructions to the letter, and have never broken a rule." "Correct. I am, task-oriented. People call me computer-like." I shrugged. Less flattering terms had been used for me. Inflexible. Anal retentive. I was not popular with my classmates, who disliked my perfect obedience to all posted signs and placards. "That is just what we need here, Sam. Now." Pim reached into a bag and from it pulled a feathered mask identical to his own, but newer.
Wear at all times, except in the sitters' quarters.
Why? I nearly asked, but caught myself. Who was I to question the whims of the wealthy, especially at the generous pay I was being offered for my 3-week stint while Mr. Kilgore and his staff went overseas? I heard the smile in Pim's voice as he said,
"It's all right for you to ask questions. Mr. Kilgore is a bit of an eccentric. Anyone who enters the house, even for a short time, must wear a mask. The magpie mask represents the sitter. Any other questions?"
I mentally reviewed the rules. Never look at the gardener?
He is superb at his work, but has an unusual deformity, and becomes violent if anyone sees it. It is unlikely you will ever meet him, but if your paths cross, just keep your eyes averted, and he won't bother you.
Peculiar. But if the man excelled at his job, perhaps his skills were worth the inconvenience of his idiosyncrasies. The remaining rules seemed self-explanatory. Except Rule 7, the delivery.
"Oh, that."
He chuckled.
"If you're still curious, in 3 weeks I'll tell you. Just be sure to leave the maze quickly. There are some flora at the center that produce pretty powerful hallucinogenic effects after more than a few minutes. Nothing bad will happen to you if you stay longer, but..."
I'll set a stopwatch.
"Good. The regular staff will attend to most things when they get back. Your presence is mostly for the packages and winding the clocks. Beyond these rules, the rest of the time you may spend at your leisure."
Really? It's that simple.
It's that simple.
The house.
An ornate staircase wound upwards, flanked by towering columns stretching to a domed ceiling. The view outside the windows showed a dazzling sea of green, dotted with flowers like stars, and topiary animals dancing among them. Pim showed me a coat room, with extra masks for visitors. He led me through each area of the mansion, knocking at each door, winding the clocks, and lastly checking all the dust covers in the long hall. Having finished nearly everything in under an hour, he took me out to the garden, where, despite the beautiful greenery, the odor of rot wafted to us.
"Carrion flowers,"
explained Pim, sweeping his arm towards a variety of strange blossoms with their spotted red petals as large as my arms.
"Their blossoms mimic the smell of decaying flesh. We have a greenhouse, too, full of orchids in the genus Bulbophil."
His fingers caught my arm. A dark shape lumbered in our periphery. I almost turned my head.
"Rule 1.
Hissed Pim, his grip nearly cutting off my circulation. I kept my face resolutely forward, resisting the urge to flick my eyes to the lurching figure at my periphery. The gardener swung something trunk-like. An arm? A gardening tool? I couldn't make out any features without looking.
"Face forward. Do not look."
A moment later, the gardener shuffled off. Pim released my arm.
"Apologies. That surprised me. I don't remember this ever happening."
It's all right. I probably would have looked if you hadn't reminded me.
"Just be alert when you are in the garden. and averting your eyes will become second nature. Come, I'll show you the sitters' quarters, and then we will be done for the day.
Sitters' quarters.
The sitters' quarters was a separate suite of rooms with a little balcony, a private bathroom with a clawfoot tub, a study, and its own kitchen and laundry. This suite belonged to Pym himself, though he told me,
"It is for the sitter's use, and while I am away, you will be the sitter, so use it as your own."
Strange pictures hung on the wall. One, the bone closet, depicted an ordinary closet door opening to a scribble of black, scrawled circles that might have been eyes peering out. Another, statues, showed a figure in the long hall reaching from under a dust cover, seemingly trying to grab a visitor by the ankle. The most disturbing, skinless man, depicted a figure who appeared to be stitched from a patchwork of skins, bits of him dropping away while he sewed on a new piece at his belly. Pym told me the artworks had all been rendered by the original caretaker, also named Pym Perrin. Apparently the name was passed like a title. From an old black and white photo, the original caretaker was Pym's opposite in every respect. Towering and heavyset, where Pym was dainty. His face was also grotesquely disfigured. As for Pym, well, he informed me that in this suite, masking was not required. Still, he kept his on, as much part of his uniform as his jacket and tie. One door in the suite led to a chamber that did not match the Gothic decor. A security room, with monitors to the front gate, veranda, and porch.
The CCTV system is finicky, but you need not worry unless there is a break-in. Should any emergency arise, call me before anyone else, even the authorities.
Pym took from his pocket the heavy brass key to the house, which he placed into my hand. Then he pointed to a prominently framed list of rules on the wall.
Obey them all, Sam. From now on, the rules are your software.
Day 1.
After performing my allotted tasks, I took out my laptop. No Wi-Fi, but I found I could connect to my phone as a hotspot, and typed up this post. I was in the middle of describing the pictures when the doorbell rang, so loudly it made me jump. I nearly rushed to answer, but then remembered Rule 7. Absurdly, I had to ignore the initial delivery attempt. The rules are your software. The package I accepted on the second delivery was large and heavy. I held my breath against the smell of the carry-on flowers and brought it to the center of the maze. I did not encounter the gardener.
Day 2.
The long hall contains dozens of shrouded statues beneath its gold-gilded fresco ceiling. The heavy dust covers are always slipping off, hence Rule 5. Every statue in the long hall must be completely covered. I was about halfway through checking the covers when behind me came a soft, whispery. At first, I thought it was a draft. But when it happened again, I looked back and noticed the arrangement of the statues had changed. One of the tall sheeted shapes was now closer to me than it had been a moment ago. Thinking I imagined it, I turned back to my task. The hairs on my neck stood straight. Even though I knew it was foolish, I could not get out of my head the artwork of a hand reaching out to drag in the nearest passerby. Still, I tried to ignore it and continued my task. I whirled and choked back a scream. A dozen of the shrouded statues loomed around me. The nearest had its arm extended, fingers poking from beneath the sheet, scarcely an inch from my face. So close, I glimpsed actual fingerprints swirled into the marble. A diamond glittered on its finger. My stomach clenched, and I nearly fled. But my habit of obedience whispered, "Rule 5. I forced my shaking fingers to tug the sheet over the statue until it was entirely covered. After checking the rest of them, I rushed for the door. "Knock," whispered Rule 2 in my head. As soon as I did, it was like a sigh went out of the room. I cast one final look back. The statues were all in their original positions.
Day 3.
A rule was broken. When the doorbell rang for the second delivery attempt, the driver shuffled his feet and asked, embarrassed,
Say, do you think I could use your bathroom real quick?"
After consulting the rules, I retrieved a mask from the foyer cloakroom. "Put this on."
"Oh, is there like a party or something?"
He laughed, turning over the elaborate mask. A goat that vaguely resembled his goateed face before putting it on.
"How do I look?"
I ushered him to the sitter's quarters bathroom. My only goal was to get him in and out. After a very quick few sounds, the toilet flushed, and he emerged, raving about the fluffiness of the hand towels. I escorted him back out the front door to his delivery truck, relieved to watch him drive away. Afterward, I delivered the package to the maze, then made myself tea while reading some of the notes written by the original caretaker. Judging by the ravings, they were in an old journal I'd found in the study. The man was quite insane. A common thread, various books and articles on the shelves detailed how members of the Kilgore family had gone mad or missing over the generations. And not only family. Supposedly, quite a few visitors had died mysteriously or disappeared, including a bride on her wedding day, reminding me of the ring I had seen on the marble finger of the hand reaching for me.
Most of the reason Kilgore Court is booked for weddings and events is because people hope to see the lights flicker or an apparition float by.
Pim told me yesterday, after I called about the statues.
And sometimes the staff oblige by tinkering with the electricity or wobbling the tables.
He'd insisted the moving statues was a hallucination, brought on by the hedge maze flora outside the long hall's windows, and advised that chamomile tea would mitigate the effect. I ignored the ringing as I finished my tea. Then I went to use the bathroom. I froze. A small black phone lay on the edge of the sink. Shit. I hissed, snatching it up. The ringing hadn't been the third attempt. I darted to the CCTV. On the screen, the driver was at the front door banging. He flung his hands up, and then walked down the porch steps and round to the garden. I rushed downstairs, scrambling to fasten my mask. A horrible feeling churned in the pit of my stomach. My feet flew over the marble floor as I dashed to the veranda and down the garden steps. At the bottom of the steps, I froze. The driver stood in the grass, keys dangling in his limp fingers, looking. I shut my eyes.
Hey! Hey, you! Visitors are prohibited from being out here.
The driver ignored me. I staggered forward until I reached him and grabbed hold of him. His body was rigid, as if rigor mortis had set in. It felt as if he had flexed steel for muscles. I tried to tug him, but a strangled sound came from his lips, a sort of chuckle. A stench made me gag. The man's bowels had loosened, and beneath the reek was something else, putrid, like old meat. I let go of him and dry heaved, and that's when I saw it, not looked at it. Thank God. I only glimpsed it from the corner of my eyes, because if I had really looked, I doubt I'd have been able to tear myself away. The gardener stood at my periphery, broad-shouldered and enormous, with a face far too long and slick, oily skin, like liquefied flesh. The driver was petrified, twitching and giggling, while the gardener took a lurching step forward. A sound between a bellow and a moan shook the air. I panicked, slipping on the wet grass, dropping the driver's phone and scrambling back, mostly navigating by feel until my knuckles slammed up against the veranda steps. I scrambled up, barely remembering to knock before entering and then dashing up to my quarters. I dialed Pim, hands shaking. Rule 1. I burst. Rule 1. He.
Slow down, Sam.
After listening to my babble, Pim interrupted with,
Let me check the veranda camera.
My fingers were already dancing over the keys, bringing up footage. The veranda camera only caught the back of the driver, still standing just as I had left him. Viewed from behind, as he gripped his keys and started, his posture taut as a hare about to bolt. Suddenly, he jerked the keys up to his face and jammed them into his eyes. I clapped a hand to my mouth.
Sam? Sam, are you there?
He's stabbing his own eyes. The keys kept jamming in and out.
Sam.
Pim's voice was cool, calming, as if speaking to a child.
What you see on your screen and what I see on my phone screen are different. They're different because you've just come out of the maze. Look out the window. Do you see anything in the driveway?
I tore my gaze away from the CCTV and looked out the window. No.
If the driver had blinded himself, his van would still be there. He obviously needs his eyeballs to drive.
Pim spoke dryly.
You're imagining things. Drink some chamomile tea, and then look at the cameras again. There's nothing there.
Oh. I bolted upright. Maybe that's him now.
Stop.
Pim almost yelped.
Rule 7. Third delivery.
Oh. I stammered, chastised.
That was too close. No slip-ups, Sam. Ever. Break a rule and we have to let you go. You won't have the money to move out of your parents' basement. They want you out, right?
How was it Pim Perrin knew about that? Had I mentioned it in the interview? Or... Of course. The address I put on my application was the same as my parents'. He was a very astute man, very exacting, like me. But whereas Pim was successful, I had failed at all my previous employment attempts, and at good relations with my family, because I am too rigid, too inflexible. I am only good at obeying rules. If I cannot succeed at this job, with its simple rules, then I can succeed at nothing. I drank the chamomile as Pim suggested, and, after collecting myself, set the grandfather clock and departed. There was no trace of the driver out front, only the tracks of the delivery van. Whatever I'd imagined I'd seen was too nightmarish to be real. But if I did not wish to be susceptible to the same influences that I suspect drove the original caretaker mad, I'd have to be careful to spend as little time in proximity to the garden as possible, confining myself mostly to the sitters' quarters.
House rules.
That night, I had a dream in which I stood in the study, and the pictures were much more vivid, each moving as if alive. As I reached out for the rules sign and flipped it over, on the reverse were explanations for each of the heretofore inexplicable rules. 1. Never look at the gardener. The sight induces unbound terror and madness. 2. Enter doors only after knocking. Unknocked doors lead to the bone closet. 3. The clocks need daily winding. Their chimes cast the veil. 4. House staff and visitors must mask. The skinless man stalks the unmasked. There is no escaping the skinless man. I woke in a cold sweat and hurried to scribble what I'd read before I could forget. It was only then that I noticed a hidden meaning embedded in the rules. A message designed, I was sure, by the same hand that painted all of those bizarre images that had wormed their way into my dreams. The mansion's original caretaker spent a lifetime exposed to the maze's hallucinogenic effects, and perhaps that worked permanently into his brain. As I suspected, it was beginning to work into mine. I took the first word of each rule and the punctuation and put them together to decipher his warning. Never enter the house. Every rule wrong. Only run. Leave. Depart. Nor did his warning end there. He embedded one more secret. The secret of what he believed to be the true nature of this grand old mansion. If you want to know what it is, just remove the numbers and read the first letter of each line. It had been 3 years since my family had last gone on vacation to Florida, something we did annually before the recession hit. Since we now had enough money, my parents decided, under the popular demand of my sister and I, that we go to Walt Disney World again. We were both teenagers, and our parents kind of saw this as a bit juvenile, but decided it would be fun anyway. I could not wait to finally go back, and neither could my sister. Being avid theme park goers as well, we were especially attracted to the creativity and the, well, magic, as one would say, about the rides there. They never got old, and had their share of nostalgia and excitement. However, there was one other reason I wanted to go. You normally associate Disney World with words such as excitement, fun, and happiness. But with these characterizations come counterbalances. After scrolling through OMG Facts one night, I came across a rather interesting fact. It was about an abandoned water park in WDW, apparently named River Country. I was absolutely appalled by this, since I had previously thought of Disney in a more idealistic and perfect way. The water park was directly on the shores of Bay Lake, being that huge, stagnant body of water adjacent to the Magic Kingdom. River Country was, and still is, on the same side as the theme park just mentioned, but right next to a resort called Walt Disney's Fort Wilderness Resort. Surrounding the water park on the resort side is a large green wall with signs dotting it. The place opened in 1976 and used water from Bay Lake in most of the park's attractions. It was very rustic and wilderness-based in design, and contained artificial rocks that resembled those used on another attraction, Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. There was a dam present to keep chunks of dirt and mud from getting into the water, too, so guests did not have to worry about swimming in an artificial bog created by water from the lake. It was open for 25 years, closing its doors in 2001. And in 2005, a statement released by Disney said the park would be closed for good. So, for about 11 years, River Country has been sitting abandoned. Nature is in its advanced stages of reclaiming the area, but the slide remains, and so do the artificial rocks, and the small pond, now a swamp, that was used for swimming. Many urban explorers have infiltrated the area, jumping over the wall to get footage of the abandoned water park. One of the most controversial things about the park nowadays is why it closed, which is what I was destined to find out. I wanted to see some real footage of the area before it closed as well, since from what I heard, it was very joyous and bustling with tourists, compared to its ghost town status today. I was without internet at the time, so about 2 days before we were planning to leave, I went to the local library, which archived many old videos that people in my community had dug up in their attics and donated to the library to be part of a small historical society, hoping that I might find some good footage I asked the librarian if they happen to carry any videos concerning family vacations. She nodded and brought me to a small section containing many old VCR cassettes and a few DVDs here and there. After about a half hour of searching, I finally came across a cassette with the words, "The Old-Fashioned Swimming Hole," inscribed on the top of it. This was a term used to describe river country during its glory days, so I took it, almost certain that it was the footage I was looking for. I asked the librarian if I could sign it out, but she told me that the historical videos had to stay in the library. I could, however, watch the video in a small conference room behind the front desk. The librarian led me into the windowless room, and I took a seat in front of the television. She left the room and closed the door, so that the audio would not disturb any of the other library patrons. I popped the cassette into the VCR under the TV, and turned the lights off so I could see the video better. I was expecting the quality to be low anyway. For about a half a minute or so, the screen was gray, and was accompanied with a loud beeping noise, typical for old VCR cassettes. The gray soon disappeared, showing footage of two individuals in front of the entrance to river country. They were both men, and it was either very late at night or very early in the morning, as nobody else was in the park. Very few of the water park's lights were on either. On the bottom left corner of the screen, the date, November 1st, 2001, was displayed. This was significant because the water park closed for good the very next day, on November 2nd. The two men were talking about how they had been denied entrance to the park in the morning, since it had reached its guest capacity limit. They also stated that at only these hours of the night could they get past the park security. The two walked up to the bigger water slides in the park, which led directly into the pond, supplied by the green water of Bay Lake. Once they both got to the top of the slide, which was encircled by artificial orange rocks, one man prepared to slide down. The two laughed over what seemed to be an inside joke, and finally, the cameraman ended up pushing his friend down. I heard him scream in delight as he descended to the pond. The cameraman then proceeded back the way they came to get to the slides, and across a bridge that traversed the small lagoon. He ended up back at the pond's shore, where the sound of a splash was heard. This is when the video started to unsettle me a little. After waiting at the shore of the pond for about 3 minutes, nobody surfaced. The cameraman began to cry his friend's name frantically and started to run back to get help at the Fort Wilderness Resort. He stopped abruptly, though, at what seemed to be the kiddie area, a small, shallow pond, on hearing a faint cough. He instantly turned around and saw a barely visible shadow about 10 or so feet behind him. Relieved, the cameraman started to approach his friend, glad that he was okay. But again, he abruptly halted. The friend's head was hanging down, and he slowly inched it up. The cameraman started to hyperventilate as the features of the other man's face began to show. Crimson, dry blood, was caked around his mouth, and some was even dripping off his chin. He was missing all the hair on his head as well. But one of the most disturbing parts of this image was that there were patches of skin missing that revealed parts of the man's skull and jawbone, and he was even missing his right eye, leaving an empty socket. I became severely nauseous at the sight of this, to the point where I was swallowing my own vomit. My heart also began to race as fear started to settle in my body. As the last minutes of the film approached, the horrendous figure muttered something that sounded like,
"There is no hope under the water."
With that, the cameraman ran for his life, wheezing and panicking throughout his ordeal. I wanted to turn the television off and run myself, so I bolted to the door leading out of the room. I reached for the doorknob, but paused. The television was giving off the sound of an old furnace found in the basement of a home, just in a softer tone. This tone, for some unknown reason, kept me from moving anywhere. I was just staring blankly at the television. The cameraman was still sprinting, but did not seem to be making any progress. He had ended up back at the large pond, where the slide had dumped his friend. You could hear him sobbing softly, fearing for his life. Suddenly, the tape began to gradually slow down, as the man frantically looked from side to side. The audio volume, along with the furnace sound, went up as the video lagged. Haltingly, the cameraman turned all the way around and shrieked at the sight of his friend. The video paused on this frame, exposing the caked blood all over the other man's face. The top of his skull was now completely exposed, his right eye still missing. His mouth was wide open, and coming from it was what looked like a combination of the water from Bay Lake and bile. This stayed on the screen for about 10 seconds, and switched to a black screen, displaying one single message.
"The epidemic begins today."
Instantly, the power went out, and I was left alone in the darkness of the conference room. I was terrified, as I could not see a thing. I couldn't see the door either. I began to shake. River Country had closed because of this. That was obvious. Disney World had been keeping a disgusting secret. I rushed to the other side of the room, disoriented. But all I felt was warm breath seeping down my neck, and the smell of bile. Every morning, my husband would wake up early and cook breakfast for us and our 2 kids. It was usually eggs and bacon, with some toast or biscuits or pancakes. We recently moved into a new 3-bedroom apartment in a much older part of the city, with this beautiful dark wood furniture already in it. Well, ever since, my husband seemed to have picked up a strange habit. He's always been a bit lazy with cleaning up after cooking, So I'd always have to take the used eggshells out of the carton and throw them away for him. After we moved into the new place, I was proud of him. There'd never be eggshells in the carton. So I'd assumed he'd taken the chance amid all the chaos to fix a few of his bad habits. Well, cue one random Tuesday morning. It was a work holiday at my office, but everyone else was out of the house. I decided to sweep and dust the place thoroughly, which we hadn't done since we'd moved in a month or so prior. I found a lot of dust bunnies and some coins and knickknacks. But, by far, the strangest thing I found was when I got to the wardrobe in our bedroom. It stood about 4 inches off the ground, on hand-carved clawed feet. When I peered under it, there was a lot of dust and spiderwebs, but behind it were eggshells. Admittedly, I jumped a little when I first saw them, but I pretty quickly realized, well, assumed, they were just regular eggshells, maybe 7 or 8. I swept them out from under the wardrobe and threw them away. I figured they were from the previous owner, though I was thoroughly confused by why they'd be there, of all places. I cleaned again the next weekend. This time, I found eggshells under the couch. Pale white, slightly bigger and slightly slimy. They must have been recent. That, and the fact I'd cleaned under the couch last time, ruled out the previous tenants as a source of the shells. I still wasn't sure I wanted to bring this up with my husband. It seemed too strange of a thing to do intentionally, so I racked my brain for other explanations. Maybe they got knocked under there unintentionally. But how would that happen a half a dozen times? Maybe they got dragged under there by an animal. But we didn't have pets. And, thankfully, no issues with rodents or other critters. Maybe one of our kids fished them out of the trash and put them there. But Zoe was too young to get into the trash can. She could barely walk yet. And Nick? Well, Nick could have done it. He was 7. But I still couldn't think of a motive. Over the following weeks, this happened several more times. Once it was in a dusty corner of the pantry, but both other times, it was the wardrobe again. I started getting increasingly curious, almost disturbed by the occurrences. It was part of my morning routine, before anyone else got up, to check under every piece of furniture and in the corner of every closet and pantry with a little pen light, to check for shells from the previous morning without being interrupted. It had gotten more frequent, pretty much every day. I was finding eggshells almost always under the wardrobe, nestled near the baseboard of the wall, not too far from the radiator. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to just watch my husband as he threw away the eggshells from breakfast. Since now that we moved across the city, my commute was twice as long, and I had to leave before breakfast was ready. Finally, I decided to just confront him about it, since it was increasingly bothering me. Was this some sort of prank? A strange compulsion? Just his way of getting back at me for always complaining about the eggshells. Surely he knew that I knew, since I'd been cleaning them up every morning from under the wardrobe. When he got home from his job one day, I gave him some time to relax, then strode into the bedroom with him and shut the door. We need to talk about the eggshells." He gave me a little smile and looked up at me.
"So, you noticed?"
Of course I noticed. I described to him my annoyance, and how after the first few times I didn't really find it funny that he left raw eggshells all over the house. In fact, I didn't really find it funny the first few times either. I told him to knock it off and stop the wardrobe thing.
"Under the wardrobe?"
Came his confused reply.
"I finally took the time to start throwing away my eggshells, since I knew it had always bothered you when I left them in the tray. That's what I was talking about. What on earth are you talking about?"
I was speechless. "So, you haven't been leaving eggshells all over the house? Almost every morning I've been finding them. Under the wardrobe mostly. But I found them in the closets, in the pantry, in my bookshelf, in laundry piles. Hell, even under the blankets of our bed. If this is some sort of prank, you've definitely gotten me good." His look of confusion was amplified.
"Who do you think? Could Nick be doing it? Or is this some sort of prank on me?"
It can't be Nick. He's too squeamish around raw eggs. I tried testing the waters to see if it was him. He wouldn't even bring me an uncracked egg when I was baking cupcakes. Nick had always been a germaphobe, so his unwillingness to touch raw eggs didn't strike me as an act.
"Are there any shells under there from this morning?"
I had never considered checking under the wardrobe in the evening, so I did. I dropped to my knees and peered under it. And nothing.
"What about the other places?"
Intrigued, I grabbed my penlight. I'd been finding something every morning for the last week, so if there were any shells, I was sure I'd find them. I checked all the usual places. Nothing. I checked the kids' beds, the kitchen cabinets, under the fridge. Still not a sign of eggshells. They must be moved there overnight, I said, puzzled. I had never connected this to the eggshells, but I started noticing this odd skittering noise in the middle of the night. I would awaken, usually between midnight and 2 a.m., to a strange clicking, like claws on the hardwood floor. It would go away after a second, so I assumed it was the house settling, or maybe a ceiling fan downstairs rattling the floorboards. Rodents had been an early thought of mine, but a call to the previous tenants and a knock at my neighbors' doors confirmed nobody had ever had issues with mice, and we'd never noticed food going missing, holes being gnawed, or droppings. I couldn't understand why mice would move eggshells around, but it was the most likely explanation I had. So I put out some humane cage traps with lures. One night, I woke up and heard the skittering again. This time, I grabbed my penlight and walked out into the kitchen. I shone it around, but the skittering faded off and stopped. On the way back to bed, on a whim, I peered under the wardrobe. At first, I thought I saw the shells again, but then I realized I was mistaken. They were uncracked, whole eggs. My curiosity turned to shock, then to revulsion, as I realized they weren't ordinary eggs. They were larger, more rounded, slightly moist, and slightly translucent. I could even see darkish blobs floating inside them. It took all of my self-control to not scream in horror, but I jumped and slammed my head into a shelf in the open per usual wardrobe. It woke up my husband, who came to his senses instantly, jumped out of bed, and asked if I was okay. I held on to the part of my head that I'd hit, wincing in pain, but managed to gesture under the wardrobe with the penlight. After looking at my head to make sure it wasn't bleeding, he cautiously peered under the wardrobe with the flashlight.
"Oh my God,"
I heard him say. We whispered for a few minutes, unsure what to do. We couldn't think of any animals that laid eggs like that. We knew we needed to get rid of them, but didn't know where to put them, or how to pick them up. We certainly weren't going to touch them. I shuddered to think of all the times I'd touched those shells with my bare hands. Once they'd mostly dried, my skin crawled as I realized whatever was hatching from those had done so possibly hundreds of times under that wardrobe. We settled on using a dinner plate and a spatula to gather up the eggs, and walked them downstairs and dumped them in the dewy grass. My husband had suggested throwing them off the balcony, but I didn't like the idea of killing whatever was growing in those eggs, despite not knowing what it was. What if they were something cute? They were not something cute. The next night was by far the most horrifying night of my life. I'm going to warn you up front. You might want to just stop here if you've experienced something similar long ago in your life, because you'd rather not know what it actually was. But here goes nothing. I'd felt a bit on edge ever since last night. I'd struggled to sleep at all. So I grabbed an iced coffee from the fridge and pulled an all-nighter writing in my journal about what had been happening and how my life was going. As the sun rose, I started feeling a little silly and figured the eggs were something innocuous, though I still didn't have the slightest clue what. I went to work, albeit with a bad headache, and everything seemed fine. I didn't bring up the eggs with my coworkers, since they would probably think I was crazy, or be grossed out and suggest something drastic, like fire. Maybe I should have considered that route. That night, I checked the house for eggs, then went to sleep, and was awoken by the usual skittering. This time, though, it was followed up by a muffled metallic clang and much more violent skittering. My heart skipped a beat. The trap must have caught some sort of animal in the house. I considered rousing my husband, but I figured I'd be brave. I took the penlight and peered cautiously around the door. The island counter blocked my view of the trap. As I carefully circumnavigated the counter, I caught a glimpse of the trap and screamed. It held a spider-like creature about the size of a rat, or a small dinner plate if you counted its legs. I dropped the light in shock, and it broke, engulfing the room in darkness. I heard more skittering behind me, and a hiss from the monster in the trap. My eyes were still adjusting to the darkness, but I could see movement out of the corner of my eye. I squared off with one of the creatures, which had its legs bent, as if it was about to leap straight at me. Looking around frantically, I realized my only remaining option: up. I grabbed the cord to the attic door and pulled. Something soft and light fell on my head and rolled off my back. But I grabbed the ladder and yanked it down, never taking my eyes off the spider thing. Its eyes glowing in the faint moonlight. I scrambled up the ladder to the attic, and the last thing I remember is seeing hundreds, maybe thousands, of tiny pinpricks of light blinking. Kids are such bizarre, creepy little monsters. I had one tiny gremlin ask me recently if Satan's birthday is Halloween just like Jesus's is Christmas. Because I am a good grown-up, I said, "Sure, that's why we collect candy for the big birthday bash." The kid in question is my daughter, by the way. Probably should mention that. Her real name is Astrid, but I'm not sure if she knows that because I usually address her as Girl. Girl, put some panties on. Girl, who's ready for kindergarten? Not you. Where are your clothes? Girl finds clothing restrictive and prefers to prance around the apartment au naturel. A real chip off the old block. But it gets to be a problem when they're old enough for kindergarten. I've tried telling her that only wild animals run around naked. Like wolves? She asked. Wolves are her favorite animal. I should have answered that they show up each morning to the pack in suits and ties for their morning howl. Instead, I said, "No, wolves do not wear clothes." Girl is now running naked around my home howling. I finally convinced her to put some clothes on by reminding her that today is Satan's birthday. Technically, it's tomorrow, but since today is a school day, we are celebrating with her class. Girl's kindergarten class is commemorating the holiday by marching to the nursing home to terrorize those who are closest to death. I have been told not to phrase it this way, and that it is better to refer to them as grandmas and grandpas. In order to keep an eye on Girl while she and her fellow wildlings hold the elderly hostage for candy, I have volunteered to chaperone. I am going dressed as a good parent. Business casual, neatly styled hair, pleasant smile, and even temper. Probably a PTA member. Definitely not a parent who is raising a feral girl. Feral girl will go as a wolf. When we arrive at the school, the screams and wails alert me to the fact that everything is perfectly normal because children are all rabid meerkats. I am given a clipboard with 7 names. I shepherd my little dumplings into a line for the 2 blocks to the nursing home. I cannot remember the names of these 7 little terrors, so I try to monitor by costume. Pumpkin, SpongeBob, Unicorn, Raggedy Orphan, Death, Spider-Man, Witch, and of course, Wolf, whose slavering snarls indicate she is now werewolf. Honestly, the costumes are not great. Pumpkin is flat and deflated, like the last gourd of the season. Unicorn's horn needs some Viagra. Spider-Man is the most convincing, tumbling around the sidewalk and spraying silly string as webbing. The other ducklings cry out, and I have to intervene, and consequently it now looks like my costume is spaghetti. Death is utterly silent, and very much a method actor. Occasionally, he swings around a shiny scythe that does not look PTA approved. I tell him that if he's not careful with that thing, I'm going to take it from him. And he gives me a long stare. I point 2 fingers to my eyes and back at him. Then, Raggedy Orphan bites said fingers, which is how I learn those rags actually indicate zombie. The words that come out of my mouth do not match my good parent costume, and all the bad little children giggle. And now here we are, parting the doors into the lobby where smiling old folks sit with buckets of candy, and I unleash the horde. Within seconds, Spider-Man is climbing the furniture. On brand. But I have to haul him off. "Put me down, Vulture," he yells. And I can't help but wonder if this is a dig at my age. Pumpkin immediately needs to pee, but she's struggling with her costume. I tell Werewolf to help her undress. My feral girl is, after all, an expert. But Girl misinterprets my directions. I spot her dancing around outside of her costume like a peeled banana. So I plunge into the chaos, like an old vulture wading into the midst of frenzying hyenas. Snatch the hands of Girl and Pumpkin and drag them to the restroom. When I return, I find the remaining children have collected around a dozing old man in an armchair. The 6 little hellions are laying candy on him like some kind of offering for Satan's birthday. Death is at the front, trying to put quarters on his eyes. I announce that we need to let him sleep and shoo them away like a flock of piranhas from fresh meat, and then approach the old man, who lounges with his head tipped back, mouth open. Some little imp even put a gummy worm in his open mouth. What if he chokes on it? So I take the worm out and take the quarters off. His skin is cold. Girl tugs at my arm. Complains her costume is itchy. I tell her it's time to head home. I am a model good parent, as I shepherd all my little hobgoblins out the door. On the way, telling the staff they will need to contact an ambulance, and likely the funeral home. My hands are only shaking a little. I deposit them all back at the school. Pumpkin, SpongeBob, Unicorn, Zombie, Spider-Man, Witch, Werewolf. Is anyone missing? No, the teacher informs me. All 7 accounted for. It's only later, as I'm patting myself on the back for a challenging day of parenting, and ranking all the costumes on a quadrant chart in my head from hardest to poop in to most likely to be sexy if worn by Timothy Chalamet, that I remembered that there was an 8th. Damn it. I knew I should have taken that scythe away from him.